Gilly gave him, and we're just going to have to play it by ear and wait to see if he arrives. So we're going to have to start now and hope that he can get in. Okay, Mike Shiner is now entering the room.
Yes.
Mike, are you with us?
It says connecting, so he's just about to.
Mike, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes, we can hear you. Mike, we're going to start the meeting. Just to explain to everybody, the run through for tonight's meeting is as follows. I'm going to introduce everybody shortly in terms of their biographies. I'm then going to hand over to Will Reid, who's just put his hand, speak for a few minutes, and then Olly Fealey-Sprague will speak for a few minutes, then Gilly Anglin-Jarrett will speak for a few minutes, and then Mike, you will be invited to speak for a few minutes. Will then take over the formal chairing of the event, and he will say a few words, and then we'll invite participants who have joined us this evening if you have any questions or comments or things that you want to say. So that's going to be the run through. It's the run through for this evening's session, and we hope to finish probably about, I don't know, 9 o'clock at the latest. It may finish earlier, or it may go on a bit longer if we get really excited and get into a real good discussion. The housekeeping is that Angela is arranged for us to record the meeting, or the event, so other people can view this afterwards. We've had a number of requests from people who can't join us tonight, who would like to listen in and to what was said tonight. The chat function, as some people have already discovered, is open, so you can communicate either individually to people or to everybody on this the event by using the chat function. Hopefully that's pretty much all the housekeeping. So without further ado, I'm going to jump straight in. It would be helpful if people could mute themselves. The reason for that is it cuts out any background noise, and then we'll invite, as and when people want to speak, you can unmute yourself. For those of you on the telephone, obviously I'm going to hopefully you'll just have to speak because we can't see whether you want to speak or not, so you're just going to have to interject. Anybody else who wants to speak, if you could put your hand up and wave, and Angela and I will alert Will that you want to speak, and then hopefully will bring you in as and when, and you can unmute yourself when invited to speak. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into it. The chair for the event tonight, as I've mentioned, is Will Reid. And Will has said that he's a fundraiser and activist advocating for youth programs and funding to help prevent crime, increase opportunities and educate those from impoverished backgrounds of all races and religions. His day-to-day job is in administration, and he's also a basketball player at National League level for Northampton. So Will be chairing the event, and you'll get to know him a little bit better later on. Then Dennis Murray will speak to us. Dennis has been with Northamptonshire Police since 1992. And in 1994, he became Hate Crimes Officer. And I also, at that point, got to know Dennis very well, as he was the Hate Crimes Officer for the north of the county, based in Kettering. And he won the David Ryan Memorial Cup for work with Muslim communities in the county. He was also awarded the Pride in Northamptonshire Award for his work and determination in relation to community engagement with Muslim communities. In 2008, he successfully applied for a higher potential development scheme and successfully achieved a master's degree in police management and leadership. And as the public order and spontaneous pre-planned firearms commander, he has a keen interest in these issues. His current role is north of Northamptonshire local policing commander, which is for Corby, Kettering, Wellingborough. And East Northants, Dennis, is it East Northants as well?
Yes, East Northants as well.
He's also the Force Tactical Use of Powers Lead. That's why he's here tonight, because in respect of the of tasers and other use of powers, which include stop and search. Unfortunately for us, but good for Dennis, on the 2nd of November, he will take up the role of Chief Superintendent for trust legitimacy and community policing at the British Transport Police. In this role, he will work for the National Police Lead for Stop and Search, DCC Adrian Hanstock, and his role will include developing a national approach to stop and search. So Dennis is being elevated to a national position with stop and search responsibilities nationally. The next speaker will be Olly Fealey-Sprague, or Oliver, as his formal name's Oliver. I know him as Olly Fealey-Sprague. He's Amnesty International's UK Programme Director for its work on military security and policing. He has over 25 years professional experience on working in a variety of contexts involving weapons, conflict, policing and related human rights issues, both in the UK and internationally. As part of this position, he currently leads Amnesty's work on less lethal weapons, including tasers. He's a member of the National Police Chiefs Council Stakeholder Advisory Group for tasers. He holds a BSc in Politics and International Relations and an MSc in International Relations, both from the University of Southampton. Next speaker is Gilly Anglin-Jarrett. Gilly, who I've known for many years, works for the County Council and is Northampton born and bred. Both her parents are from Jamaica, and they met in London in the late 60s, where they were here to finish midwifery and civil engineering training. For 99% of her professional life, she worked in the public sector at local and central government level in senior management roles in relation to scrutinising educational opportunities for Black heritage children and young people across Northamptonshire and indeed the UK. She's also been involved in community activities relating to challenging inequality in all its forms and the impact on Black communities in Northamptonshire and across the UK. She got back involved with the Stopsearch working group, which you'll find out more about later, in 2019, and was elected as the Stopsearch working group community co-chair in July of this year. So it will then be open house. So I'd formally like to hand over to Will, who's going to chair the rest of the session, and who'll welcome Dennis Murray as the first speaker. So thank you, Will. Over to you, mate. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, guys, do apologise. If we start with, I believe Dennis is up first. So Dennis, if you'd like to start off with, you've got 10 minutes if you want to start off with the discussion, please.
No worries. So good evening, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to come on this evening and speak to you all. And what I'd like to do is just take you through a little bit of a potted history about where Northants police have been, what they've been doing, and where we currently sit now, and hopefully explain some of the progress we've made, and then later on answer any questions that you've got. So about 2 years ago, Mike Shiner, who is on this call, did a piece of academic research around the reasonable grounds panel that Northants police have, which is a panel where the community come and they look at our stop and search checks, they dip sample them, and they say whether or not they think the grounds were reasonable. And Michael came in, and this was before my arrival, and he did a piece of work where he looked at that, produced a report for the force to consider, and that report was complementary in many ways, but it also identified the nationally recognised issue around disproportionality, and that the reasonable grounds panel actually was never designed to tackle disproportionality, albeit it made some positive inroads. So, for example, when Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary came in and examined some of our reasonable grounds forms, they said that it wasn't recorded in the way that they would expect to record reasonable grounds. Now, that panel then took it to a place where HMIC came back in, and every single one that they examined, they said was now correct and recorded in a way, and the community agreed with those assessments. So we made real progress. So we had a launch probably nearly a year ago now, where Mike, myself, and Jonah and a number of other people launched the findings of that report. And at that time, we had probably a limited understanding of the data and the processes and the structures in place. And one of the key findings from Mike's report is that we had to build our stop and search into a governance system that not only had a police governance system, but had the community at the heart of what we were doing and how we were managing this. So with James Andronoff, who's the ACC and the force strategically for this, and he's online with us here this evening, I worked with James and we came up with a governance structure that didn't just look at stop and search, because, and it's already been alluded to on this call, all of these things are linked and connected. So we looked at the 5 key thematic strands for use of powers, and they were stop and search, use of force, taser, criminal justice outcomes, and other police powers. So things like traveller encampment enforcement notices, police bail, domestic violence orders, and those were the 5 strands that we agreed. We then put in place a lens that would sit over that. So everything that we do has to be ethical, it has to be effective, and it has to be open to public scrutiny. And then around that built a structure where James would lead the strategic group, I would lead the tactical delivery of this, and then each strand would have a dedicated owner at chief inspector level that would kind of become the resident expert in that area and be able to advise the force, produce the data, and develop that strand so that the public could see exactly what we were doing and why. James signed off on all of that. That was agreed, and we put that in place probably February this year, at which point we went out, following on from Mike's recommendations, to recruit a community co-chair, a member of the public who had an interest in stop and search, and Gilly Anglin-Jarrett was voted in by the community and some of the members of the stop and search working group as the community co-chair. Now, looking at that also, we are now about to recruit for the reasonable grounds panel community co-chair, as well as looking at things like a youth forum, a youth commission, and that's some of the work that we're developing. James has also committed to giving a dedicated resource to developing the data into more than just binary numbers. So what's the narrative behind the data? When we have the data, we should be able to explain to the community what the data is, but also what it means and what are the interpretations behind it, and seek the community's views on that. Now, that work is in process, and our data is in a better place than it's ever been. So if you go on the website now, you should be able to find on our site, and I've been on there and checked it, Taser, stop and search and use of force data which will be refreshed every 28 days. Now, in addition to all of that work, we've started to do other things. And Paul, I know you've been involved in being a community observer that comes out and looks at our use of powers. You were involved in the Travellers Fair at Wollaston. Arthur Newbury, who's online for the IAG, came out and looked at our use of powers around Black Lives Matters protests to make sure that what we were doing was being scrutinised and held to account by the community. And then in addition to that, we've had issues where, for example, the community have been asked to contribute to things like a potential outdoor unauthorised music event before we've applied any powers to say, do you believe that what we're about to do is legitimate? Is it proportionate? And how can we actually prevent powers from being used by engaging with the community to help us solve these problems? So we've built all of that into a structure, which again is available. I shared it at the last version of this that we did. We're now engaging with youth groups, and I've been working with Rumby, who's online here, and Jenny Campbell to talk to youths. Jenny's group had a debate with James Andronoff last week about defunding the police. I've done numerous events with Rumby in relation to how we engage young people and knowing their powers around stop and search. And recently James spoke to the national lead on stop and search, and his view was, not James's, that the national lead was that Northants police are far more developed compared to other forces, and we should be showcasing the work that we're doing as good practice. Now, at the event that Anjona held, where we launched the report that Michael had written, the IOPC and the College of Policing both also said, whilst there are a number of things that are subject to further improvements, and we as Northants Police accept that, you are far more advanced than many other forces in drawing this in together, having co-production, involving the community, and throwing yourself open to scrutiny. Now, if you look at it 7 months ago, the data will show that if you were black, you were 10 times more likely to be stopped and searched in Northamptonshire. We are now at the stage where for 3 months consistently, that figure is reduced to 2.1. So it's still not right. It's still not where we'd want it to be, but we are making significant inroads to getting this to a position where we can move towards proportionate stop and search for everybody. Now we're trying to also take the learning from that and roll that into Taser, because we know that disproportionality will start with stop and search. It will follow through to arrest, to use of force, to charges, to criminal justice outcomes and sentencing. And actually, we also know that internally, through things like professional standards and minority officers, there are some disproportionality there as well. So all of those things are being worked on at the minute. I'm really open to answering anybody's questions as we go through this. And I'm really excited to hear what other people's views are from the guest speakers this evening. So thank you for your time, and happy to answer any questions as we go on.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Ollie, if you want to pick up from where Dennis left off.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, every year they add new words to the dictionary, and I think this year we're going to have "you're on mute" will be the next word that goes into the the dictionary. You cannot believe how many of these I've been on where you're on mute, including some pretty high-profile people as well. Everybody does it. So anyway, as Paul said, I've been working in and around this area for about 25 years, but for the last 14, I've been the lead person at Amnesty International in the UK, working on the military security and policing sector, which for the purposes of this particular Zoom chat involves the use and deployment of Taser, but also because it's a bit of a niche and specialist area. There's not many people in the kind of Amnesty International movement that work on this stuff. There's only a handful, and I'm one of them. So I don't just work here in the UK. I kind of develop our positions on this as part of the global movement. So what that means is my day job's quite varied. So, you know, I'm just as likely to be up at 6:30 in the morning on Nick Ferrari show on LBC talking about the latest police taser figures, or I'm at the UN speaking to the UN Human Rights Panel or something like that. So I've got quite a varied kind of myriad of different functions. So I'm going to give a quick 2-minute overview. People write books on this stuff, so I'm really sorry that this is literally 2 minutes. But a quick 2-minute overview on Taser and its relationship to human rights and human rights legislation and standards and practices. And I would say that our movement, Amnesty, is a kind of one of the leading global organisations working in this area. Our main position on all police use of weaponry is that they have to be rooted in the professional standards that flow from the international human rights instruments around things like arbitrary killings, torture, those sorts of things that are prohibited, and all of the professional standards, the training guidance, the operational guidance, all of that stuff flows from those rooted principles. And what that says for devices like Taser is that there is a specific role for them, but there are also a number of key red flags around their use and misuse. And I guess our organisation is one of those that talks about those red flags. So in terms of I mean, I guess most people know this, but just in case you don't, so in terms of the human rights framework and the human rights legislation that exists in the world, you know, there are absolute prohibitions on arbitrary and unlawful killings by the government, by the police. The same, there are absolute prohibitions on the use of torture and cruel and degrading treatment. So how that translates into the UK law is that you essentially have Article 2 and Article 3 of the Human Rights Act. Article 2 is about your right to life and your right not to be arbitrarily killed, and Article 3 relates to your prohibitions on torture. So you're not allowed to be tortured or subject to cruel and degrading treatment. Now, those in turn are derived from the pan-European ECHR standards, which are in turn derived from the various core human rights texts that exist at UN level. And added to that, there's various court case law rulings that relate to police action over the world that further define what that means around police use of force and police use of weaponry, and a whole myriad of professional standards, guidance documents, etc., that link the police use of weapons like Taser within this overarching human rights framework that exists. So one core example that you might hear a lot when you talk when people are working on Taser and less lethal weapons in general is this thing called the UN Basic Principles on Use of Force of Firearms, which sets the kind of global standards on how police around the world are supposed to use weaponry. And I get this quoted at me all the time, and as usual, it's usually misquoted. So they quote the first half of the sentence, not the second half. So the first half of the sentence says that, you know, all police forces around the world have an obligation to provide a range of less lethal weaponry as an option to not having to use lethal force. I.e., you know, try to find something else that means you don't have to shoot people. That's basically what that's about. So the biggest proponents and supporters of Taser quote that ad infinitum, say, you know, well, the UN says the Taser is what we should be using, da-da-da-da-da. But what they don't quote you is the second half of that stipulation, which talks about the need to root all of these things into a system of careful evaluation and very rigorous controls so that you don't lose control of the technology and cause more problems than you want to solve. So what that basically means in the UK is that we are genuinely in support of the use of Taser as it was originally conceived to be introduced, which was essentially a distance control weapon that could resolve very serious life-threatening incidents from a safer distance of about 12 to 14 feet. And I think it's true to say that we've studied more than any other organisation in the world the use of this weapon and other similar types of weaponry and the specific specific risks that they pose when they are not used properly. And this is specifically in areas, not just in the UK, but around the world. This is specifically in areas where the professional standards around the deployment, use and control of these things slip and they're lax. And I think what that means in the UK is that we are concerned about mission creep. We are concerned about Taser becoming normalised as a piece of health and safety equipment rather than the very highly specialised weapon that it was designed to be. So, you know, it is true that Tasers can save lives and they can protect officers, but they can also take life themselves. They are less lethal, they're not non-lethal. And they raised a whole load of specific concerns about their use on vulnerable population groups, whether that's children, the mentally ill, the elderly. And in this context, as Superintendent has already said, but you see across use of force, disproportionality along racial grounds is a key issue. It's not just in Taser, it's on use of force. Now, from my dealings with the police, they find this as surprising and shocking as we do. They may not admit it openly to you, but for example, things like the use of force reporting tool has only been around for about 3 or 4 years. I'm part of the program group that put that together. Now what that does is not just about Taser, it collates data across the use of force. So there's now national data on handcuffing, on forms of restraint, on things like spit guards. All of that stuff gets sent to the Home Office for review and publication, and that has shown a considerable and concerning level of disproportionality along racial grounds, which surprises the police. Because I've sat in meetings, and very recently I was in a use of force program board meeting, and there was some discussion about the figures on racial disproportionality around Taser use being there. Are you really 7 times more likely to be tasered if you're a young black man than if you're a white person? And there's genuine disbelief that that is actually what the figures say. The figures do say that. So I think the police are genuinely as concerned as we are about the trends that we're seeing, and especially from my work on Taser, I know that they are beginning to think that something needs to be done. That something needs to be done about this. So I don't really work in Northampton. I work sort of nationally and internationally, but I do live in Northampton, so I have a special interest in what goes on here. So I was looking at the figures for Northampton, and I was sent a document from the Home Office that had a big thing on it that says, "Do not share under any circumstances." So I'm going to break the rule and share it. Well, I'm not going to share it. I'm going to talk about it, about some of the things it says. And some of the things it does say is it confirms the fact that you are nationally 7 or 8 times more likely to have a taser used against you if you're a black person than if you are a white person. And don't be complacent if you live in Northamptonshire, because Northamptonshire doesn't come across too well in the league table. Statistics are a difficult thing, and there's so many caveats around them, but you're actually joint 4th in the worst record of any police force in the UK on this particular aspect. So, you know, the figure is per 10,000 people. So you've got a rate of about 42 taser uses per 10,000 people for black people, as compared to about 5.5 per 10,000 people for white people. And that's actually considerably worse than London. Everybody thinks that the Met are one of the worst for this, but actually in the Met, it's 28.1 per 10,000 and 6.2 if you're white. So, you know, you've got to be careful with statistics, but Northamptonshire still has a long way to go to start to resolve this issue. I'm going to finish. I've probably gone over my minutes. There's so much more that you could say, but how are we moving forward on this, and how are we tackling this problem? So I'm going to talk about some things from my area of work and my work with the police that I know is happening to start to begin to address this. So the first thing is there is currently a police review of disproportionality on taser use within the police that's being led by the National Police Chief Council, and we're advising that work as part of the group that I sit on, which is the National Stakeholder Taser Advisory Group. And it's been a bit of a journey from and I know Mike might have some views on this as well, Mike China, but there's been a bit of a journey within the police leadership on this issue over the last 6 months. And I think, given the context of what's happened around Black Lives Matter, what I said earlier about genuine levels of concern about what the figures are showing in this area, that there is now, at least within the people that I'm talking to, a very serious intent from those individuals to better understand racism within taser use. And I use that word, actually the word racism is starting to be used. We hide around this word disproportionality, but what we essentially mean is racist outcomes on use of force. And that word is starting to be used more and more often in meetings, which is helpful because we have to recognize the problem to acknowledge it. And I think one of the things that has happened in the last 6 months within the police looking at this is that they have seen, following advice from others, that the review that they're doing has to be seen to be independent. It can't be seen as police investigating the police. Otherwise, it's not going to address any of the concerns that are most directly affected by the community. And it has to start from an acknowledgement that there is a problem, rather than just a system of research that explains the problem away. And that, I think, has been a journey within the police to come to that conclusion. So what you're looking at here for Taser is almost like a Macpherson report type, not quite to the same scale, but a kind of Macpherson report style investigation into disproportionality in Taser. And they're currently looking for an independent chair, a credible person that can speak to affected communities and has the trust and stuff that it'll be done properly. And rather than this being like a 6-month bit of work, it's probably going to be 2 or 3 years in the making. So it's it's early days, but it's a fairly established and fairly serious project. And I think we're likely to be involved through my stakeholder advisory group. We're going to like to sit on the program board of this area of work. So I think that's one area of potential hope. I think the police are not playing lip service to this. They're actually genuinely wanting to get to the bottom of this. And at the same time, they've been referenced before, but there's an IPOC thematic review looking at disproportionality. Again, it's been triggered by recent events, Black Lives Matter and some of the controversial cases, but they're looking at all of the cases they're investigating that look at disproportionality and do a kind of thematic report on that to see whether there are any commonality themes and any learning points. And the last two things that are happening that I think are very important in this context, they're slightly abstract, but they get to the root of some of the wider problems, is that for the first time in 14 years, there are serious efforts to review what's known as the APP, the Authorised Professional Practice, which is the national guidance that sits at the College of Policing for use of Taser. Now, my organisation and a lot of the stakeholders that I work with have long said that particular document isn't fit for purpose. It's too vague, it's too general, it doesn't articulate the concerns, it doesn't provide suitable guidance on the use of this weapon. And we finally got to a point where in November, we're going to start to look at that APP to see whether it is actually fit for purpose and does its job, which will have implications for addressing issues like racial disproportionality. And the last thing I'll just finish off here is a new system that's being developed through the National Police Chiefs, which is going to be a kind of an audit of Taser training. Because one of the things that we're concerned about is that everybody is supposed to have the same guidance and the same system and the same rules and regulations nationally around Taser, but we do get disproportionality not just in the figures but also in the kind of the way Taser's used. And there are differences in the way training might be rolled out, or the which officers get it, or the deployment and use within different force structures. And there's now a proposal on the table to put a kind of team in that will be a kind of audit. So there'll be a team that goes in to audit all of the various national police control systems for Taser. And one of the things that they'll be looking at is how disproportionality is addressed through the training program. So I think the disproportionality review by the police, the IOPC review, the audit of Taser training program, and the review of national guidance all gives us some hope that finally we might be getting to a position where we are starting to address the problem. And I'm going to stop there because I've rambled on far too much.
Thank you very much, Ollie. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Next up is Gilly. If you want to come up next.
Evening, everybody. I think what I'll start by saying is I attended 3 meetings in 2019. Two. Can you see me? Hello? Hello?
No, we can't see you. We can hear you, we can't see you.
But you can't see me?
We can't see you. You need to put your video on. You've now muted yourself.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, you just muted yourself now.
Right, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Oh, hold on. Right, let me talk while I sort this out. So I attended last year 3 meetings, 2 of which were reasonable grounds panels, 1 of which was a stop and search working group chaired by Lara Alexander-Lloyd. And one of the things that I noticed at all 3 meetings was how little understanding the community.
You muted yourself.
Hello?
Yeah, you just muted yourself. Now we can see you.
Can you hear me?
And we can hear you.
Excellent. Yeah, so I was concerned the 2 last year, 2019, 2 reasonable grounds panel meetings and 1 stop and search working group meeting, that the community side had limited understanding of what is in effect a reasonable ground in relation to the use of powers and stop and search. And one of the things that I was persuaded to do, because I did try to find somebody else to go put themselves forward to become the first community co-chair, I was determined to use my background of working in the public sector and as a community activist in relation to the rights of the BAME community, black non-white British in Northamptonshire, but also in the country. And one of the things that was quite clear to me that we needed to do was to become a positive, critical friend for the police in terms of scrutinising their use of powers and their use of force. Now, Ollie's already described what that entails. Now, the context for me is Northamptonshire, and I'm a bit worried that he's just said that Northamptonshire police are 4th worst, but more alarmingly, we're worse than the Met, if that's possible. But we'll find out about what that actually means. Now, I'm really interested to know how the changes in terms of taser deployment for the police in Northamptonshire will change next year, and the potential impact in terms of disproportionality on the BAME communities, because we already know that BAME heritage young men, particularly aged from as young as 10 years old to 16, 17 to 21, 22 to 29, 30 and onwards, are disproportionately being targeted in terms of Northamptonshire police, and it's to do with not just use of powers, it's use of force. Now, one of the things that I'm quite keen to find out is what will all the reviews that Ollie's just mentioned, what will they do in the context of Northamptonshire in terms of the targeting of innocent, non-criminals, black BAME heritage males, whether they're young or older, because I'm being told that it doesn't matter what age you are. If you're a BAME heritage male in Northamptonshire, and you're an innocent person, no criminal record at all, you're either being targeted if you're a young person by the gangs to join you, or you're disproportionately being targeted in terms of stop and search by the police. So before I became chair, I kept asking, where's the data that we can look at in terms of ethnicity breakdown? Because I'm all about evidence. My background is maths and education. So I'm all about, where's the evidence of what's going on? And for me as a black person and all my black friends and family, we don't recognize the term bias, because you can have a biased thought, but if you don't act on it, nothing happens. But for us as black people, when somebody has a racist bias, that becomes racism in terms of the impact on the community. And so we don't ever use the term bias. And I'm glad to hear Olly acknowledging that it's racism that's happening, because that's the impact. You can have a biased thought, but if you don't do anything, there's no impact. The impact, if you have a biased thought, is that is racism. And it's not just the police. There's institutional racism all over. Whatever we do as Black people, no matter where we are in this country, whether it's access to appropriate level of health, educational, the disproportionate number of BAME heritage young people who are being excluded. Now, when they're excluded, the schools do that, but they don't understand the consequences of doing that, that those young people potentially could become groomed and targeted and become part of an organised crime group. One of the things that I'm pleased about was that and that's me and Dennis and the SSWG people, police and the community members, we've made a commitment to recruit the first youth engagement coordinator and also set up at the first ever SSWG Youth Council. And the really cool thing about the Youth Council is that it'll all, and the youth engagement coordinator, they will both, all of them will be people, young people, minimum age 16, eldest would be 21, 22. And they are, one of the things that they share is a shared experience of being targeted either by gangs or by the police. And they're all BAME heritage, and it's based on the data that came out in terms of disproportionality from the OSF report last year, the LSC report. And for us, it's about giving the silent majority I like to talk about, which is the majority of our young people, BAME heritage, white Brit, it doesn't matter what they are, they're not criminals. But in terms of the BAME heritage young people that are innocent, they don't have a voice, because rightly so, all the police resources and the statutory agencies and the community, they focus on trying to get young people to come out of gangs or not join gangs. That's fine, but the majority of our young people are not in gangs. So where do they have a voice? And what we're going to do is give a focus and an opportunity for young people to have a voice through this youth engagement coordinator and the youth council. And I've put in a bid to Stephen Mole, Police and Fire Crime Commissioner's Office to fund the creation of the recruitment of the youth engagement coordinator, but also setting up our first youth council in Northampton. And eventually the intention is that my vision is that we'll have branches of the SSWG in Northampton all across the county, wherever young people need to come together. In addition to that, we're going to set up a youth only, young people only online radio station. So, and that'll be linked up to the secondary schools, and it will also enable young people across the county to share with each other and get support, not just from their school, but also within the community. Because one of the things that we hear quite often is young people, that the adults in their communities or their families don't understand what it's like to be targeted by the gangs or targeted by the police, and they don't always feel confident to be able to make a formal complaint. Now, my view is we need to help them, we need to empower them. So all of the community organisations that currently are representatives on the Stop and Search working group, what we need to look at is how those organisations, how they involve their young people. So for example, to my knowledge, Rumbi's African Riser Youth is the only solely focused young people voluntary organisation. And Dennis has already mentioned what he's been doing with her. And I only met Rumbi this year through the virtual meetings. I didn't know about her before. And I was really impressed with what she described to me in terms of the support that she's been providing to her young people. And it's not just young people in Northamptonshire, it's young people across the country. And that is the key thing for me. Whatever we do in Northamptonshire, I mean, I'm happy that Dennis has said we're an example of good practice, but that actually doesn't mean anything to me, because to me it's about what does that mean in terms of the change, the positive change for young Black people, young Black adults and Black adults, predominantly male adults who don't feel safe because they walk out their door at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to work, and they're walking along and an unmarked police car turns up and stops and says, why are they stopping somebody at 6 o'clock in the morning when they're on the way to work? So there is this issue about my concern is if we already have an issue of disproportionality based on ethnicity in terms of use of force, sorry, in terms of stop and search, it's not a leap for that to then come out in terms of taser use. And one of the things that I want to hear tonight is, what are we going to do to ensure that the scrutiny of the use of powers in terms of tasers is addressed? Because at the moment, people are worried. We heard that young people who spoke to James Andronov were concerned about the use of tasers. It might be to do with the fact that they may have family or they live in London. I don't know. It may be that they live somewhere else other than Northamptonshire where there's a higher use of it, but it doesn't really matter, because for me, anywhere in this country, we should, as Black heritage people, I worry that my son who lives and works in London, he's 22, but he actually only looks 18 because he's, you know, kind of young and beautiful like his mummy. I worry that he could be on his way to work or on his way back from work in the evening, and, you know, he steps off the bus and he's walking up to his house and the police decide for whatever reason to target him. Because most of the time my son is wearing a mask and he's always got his work rucksack on his back. Now, I don't know whether I should be even more worried, but every single day I have to get him to ring me in the morning and ring me before he goes to bed, just so I know that he's safe. And I'm not saying I think the police are targeting him. I'm equally concerned about the gangs. So I can say without any apology, I want stop and search to be more effective against the criminals. I don't care how many times criminals, gang members, people that carry weapons are targeted. My concern is about the potential disproportionality for the innocent, non-criminal BAME heritage people. I want my son to be safe in London. I want my nephew who lives in Northampton to be safe, and all my friends have got sons and brothers, or even uncles and grandfathers, or any male within the BAME community, that wherever they go, if they're driving a car or if they're walking, their heart doesn't stop when they see a police officer or police officers or a police car or an unmarked car flashing them down, because that's the reality of living in a country where we are in a minority. And I'm going to say this, where you have countries that, so my parents are Jamaican born, and my grandmother was Cuban, maternal grandmother. Now, neither Cuba or Jamaica has issues in relation to Black heritage people being targeted unless they're criminals, okay? Because the police in Jamaica and Cuba, they target the criminal element. And because both those countries are Black majority, there is no issue of disproportionality, okay? And the only people that get angry and upset about what the police do, and by the way, they're armed, is that they don't do enough to target the gangs. But in this country, where we are in a minority, we don't know how to make sure that our children, those who've got grandchildren, my nephew, my friends who've got boys, my friends who've got godsons, etc. My godson, actually, I do worry that they could just be walking home with their mates from school, from a night out, and they potentially could either be attacked by some racist person, because that's one of the things that's come out unfortunately since Brexit, that people who have racist views feel that they've got carte blanche to speak and behave in whatever way they want. And it's all part of the same thing, that we have, as a country, since 2016, we have lurched, or 2017, to the right. And for Black people who were already being targeted by the racist, ignorant people that are around, this government has given them carte blanche to behave like that, very much like what's happening in America. And tonight, I want to come away feeling empowered and positive about what we can do in Northamptonshire. And I don't mind if we get linked up with good practice elsewhere, but this is about Northamptonshire. So whenever my son comes, well, at the moment he's in London, so I haven't seen him since March because of COVID, but there's a potential that, when my son comes home, I want to be able to walk up and down, or drive, whatever, without potentially being stopped. And it's the same for most black people that I knew. Every one of my male friends has been stopped more than 3 times. And they're like, some of them are grandparents or great grandparents, and they've been stopped since they were like 14 years old, and they're now in their 50s and 60s. So let me end on a positive. The reviews that Olly has mentioned, I hope there are black people, BAME heritage people who have direct personal experience of being targeted, but they're not from a criminal background, because that's what we need. We need the voice of the silent majority who have been targeted, either their families to join gangs or they've been targeted by the police. Thank you. That's me, Dan. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Next up, we have Mike. Mike, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Good, thank you.
Cheers.
So
take it away.
Please bear with me. I'm doing this on a mobile phone, sitting in a cottage in somewhere in Herefordshire. We're a bit remote. Wi-Fi's a bit in and out, so we'll give it our best shot and see where we go. So I think, as Dennis flagged, I do have a particular interest in Northamptonshire because of the reasonable grounds panel evaluation. But I'm gonna today give some reflections more on, I think, on a national level, and I'm going to be talking both in this area, so the research I've been involved in, some of
Mike, I think it might be better if you go without visual and it keeps your bandwidth a bit higher. You there?
Has he gone?
I think he might have gone.
Can't see him on the screen now. I don't know if he's dropped out.
He may have gone. He might have to get in his car. He may have to get into his car and drive out the village to get a better
Yeah.
He's still on. He's on the second page.
Frozen, yeah, yeah.
He's frozen to me. Is he still frozen to everybody else?
Yeah.
I can't see him. I can't see him.
Yeah, I think we've lost him. We're gonna have to wait to see if he can rejoin us. Mike, are you rejoining us?
Hi everyone. Sorry, I lost you then. Am I back?
Yeah,
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
What was the last thing that you heard? Because I think I was happily talking away and hadn't realised that nobody could hear me.
I think he was about 30 seconds in.
Okay, so I'm gonna.
Oh.
No, he's gone again.
Yeah.
Paul, I think maybe
primarily in relation to policing and stop and search.
Mike,
we can't hear
Hello,
you. Mike, we can't hear you. I suggest you switch your screen off. Will suggests that you switch your video off and just rely on sound.
Yeah. Happy to do that. How's that?
That's better. We can hear you. We'll give it a go. Just carry on.
Lovely. So I'm going to speak to 3 questions. I'm going to think about where are we now, primarily in relation to stop and search. And I'm going to think about what have we learned from the last 10 to 15 years of engagement around trying to promote fair and effective use of stop and search. And what do I think the ways forward are? So firstly, in terms of where are we now, I think we've shifted from one policy.
we were going so well. Mike, if you can hear me, you might have to go out of the village where you are and get a better signal.
He needs to drive out the village.
Into another. So in May, we saw a spectacle.
Mike, we can't hear you. You cut off again. Mike?
Yeah.
Hi, Mike. You might have to come out of the village into a better area with signal, if possible.
Right, Mike, can you drive your car out of the village and see if the signal will go up, because it's the village that is the problem. So if you can drive out, I don't know.
No, it's doubtful. The Wi-Fi is here, so it's only going to be worse if I go out.
All right.
Ah. Let me think.
I guess we'll just have to proceed without me, I think.
You might keep. You've got sound now, so let's see if it goes.
Okay.
We'll give it one more try.
Yeah.
Okay, happy to. So I think we've moved from one policy phase into another. So under Theresa May, we saw a very impactful process of reform in relation to stop and search, where I think there was a real reckoning that the police really had to look at how they were using the powers, and we saw big reductions. What we're moving into now, and I think it's largely politically motivated, is a shift away from that we're moving much more into a command and control type focus. How are we doing?
Still going? Yeah.
Okay, good. And I think a lot of this is politically motivated. If we're looking at the comments of Boris Johnson, if we're looking at the comments of Priti Patel, we're seeing this in policy interventions. So the restrictions that had been put in place on Section 60 have been removed. We're seeing a move to bring in a new order where the police can stop and search for knives based on simply on the fact that somebody has a previous conviction, which undermines one of the key protections that's evident in PACE. I think we see it in relation to the rolling out of Taser, and we've seen it in relation to the policing of COVID. And I guess what I would say to the police is that for some police, this might be a breath of fresh air to move away from having to engage critically with their own use of stop and search to actually being able to use it more freely. What I would say is when the police are being politicised in this way, there are real risks to the police. So if we think about the way in which the police were used in the 1980s in the miners' strike, that has been identified as one of the key negative impacts on police legitimacy in this country. So I think the police really need to think about their independence from government and really understand that their role is one of the arm of the state, not the role of government. So I think I would really encourage the police to continue thinking about the kinds of things that they have been thinking about for the last 10 years in terms of legitimacy, the reform, improved scrutiny of the use of stop and search. And I'm really encouraged to hear the positive things that are happening in Northamptonshire. How are we doing? Can we still hear?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, good. So what have we learned? So I think we've learned a couple of things in the last 10 years. We've learned that regulation matters. So how we regulate police powers can have a real impact on the way that they're used. As I said, the last 10 years has been unparalleled in its impact on the use of stop and search in relation to the numbers of stop searches. So we have to ask ourselves what was different this time round from the previous attempts. And I think there are two things that I would pick out. One is, this time it was done under a Conservative government, which meant really that the police had nowhere to go in terms of resisting the reforms. Previously, where it's been a Labour government, those attempts at reform were to some extent by the Conservative opposition. One of the other facts, and I think this is key to our learning, is that HMIC did its first ever thematic inspection of stop and search. And that was critical in promoting this phase of reform. And I think what that teaches us is that transparency is key to this. So that if the police feel there is a genuine level of scrutiny, and that scrutiny, the results of that scrutiny being made publicly available, then I think that is a real driving force in terms of a motivation for change. And the way in which I think that works is there are many police officers who are genuinely concerned about the reputation of the force and understand the importance of legitimacy. So that once that legitimacy is threatened through, for example, the transparent publication of negative results such as 24% of stop searches not having reasonable ground trouble, they understand that that's very damaging for the reputation of the force and that that's policing much more difficult. One of the other things that we've learned, and this is crucial, is although we've seen a 75% reduction in the use of stop and search, we have seen no reduction in ethnic disparities. In fact, disproportionality has gone up. And this is part of an ongoing trend. So since Olly, I think, referenced the Macpherson report, since the Macpherson report, we have seen a very striking increase in rates of disproportionality. And it seems that there have been two primary waves of efforts to reduce disproportionality, and what they've actually resulted in is increases in disproportionality. Because what we've seen is with the reduction of the use of stop and search, a much greater concentration in a smaller number of officers, in particular teams, concentrated on much tighter geographic areas, typically areas where Black and minority ethnic communities tend to live, and so that we've seen an increase in disproportionality because of that. And I think this highlights a critical lesson for us, is that we can see improvements in the use of stop and search in terms of stronger grounds, less use of the power, increase in arrest.
I've lost him now.
Mike, can you hear us? Mike?
Mike, are you there?
No, I think we've lost him. Mike?
Yeah, I think we've lost him, Paul.
Yeah. What I would suggest is, I mean, he may come back, but I suggest that we go straight into the next section,
Yeah,
Will, which is you.
Sure. That's fine. So, hi everybody. My name's Will Reid. I am a board member of Northampton's Rights and Equality Council. I also have my own foundation, which raises money for kids who are going to college to pursue their ambitions with sport or with performing arts. I also play basketball. You mentioned at the start of this, play basketball for Northampton. I also coach for them as well, so I'm quite active. I used to be a youth football coach as well, so I'm keen to keep a foot in developing and helping youth stay on the right path and not go down the path that many of my friends or people that I've been known or know that have gone down. I'm going to start with some questions for Superintendent. I've got here a couple of questions that were raised right at the start. So I'm going to start with the first one, if that's okay with you.
Hello.
Hi, Mike. We're going to move forward because the connection keeps dropping out.
Okay.
Sorry to cut you off.
No worries.
If anyone has any
worries,
questions
fine.
for Mike for anything that he did say, please drop me a message and I will ask the question as and when is applicable. Yeah, sorry, Dennis. Let's have a look.
Yes.
The first question, it was one that I wrote down as well, is you spoke about reasonable grounds.
Yeah.
The question to summarize basically is what constitutes reasonable grounds? What is it that goes into reasonable grounds and why? What constitutes reasonable grounds?
Okay, so with reasonable grounds now, it can't be based on just one sole thing. So, for example, the most common one, and if you look across the UK, 75% of the stop and searches relate to things like smell of cannabis. And actually, the authorised professional practice around this stipulates that that is not a reason in itself to do reasonable grounds. So reasonable grounds might be that something has happened, somebody fits a description, that they're in a particular area at a time something is happening. What it cannot be, and what isn't reasonable is, for example, we've had a description of a person of a crime that happened 12 hours ago in this area, etc., etc. And they're the sorts of things that actually would fail the reasonable test. And each one, it's hard to stipulate it down to one thing, but actually there should be a number of factors that lead you to believe that that person may be involved in the thing that you're looking at. And the speculative element of you're in a high crime area or you're somebody that's known for previous crimes in themselves are not reasonable grounds for doing stop and searches. Likewise, you're going to work at 6 o'clock in the morning. So what? If nothing is happening, if a crime hasn't happened, if you're not in a particular area that's been suffering from crime with people of your description, none of those things would meet the reasonable grounds test. And what the reasonable grounds panel looks at through a dip sample is they watch the body worn video, they read what's written down on the form, they look at all the circumstances and say, to the reasonable person, does that sound like it is a reasonable grounds? Now, whereas when we first started this and Mike looked at it, HMIC and Northants police would say that those grounds were not being done in the proper way. As a result of the work we've done with the community and HMIC. We then went to, out of 100 passed. HMIC came in about 3 weeks ago and dip sampled 152 stop and searches for reasonable grounds. And out of 152, they found 7 that weren't either recorded properly or did not meet the reasonable grounds. So that improvement has been sustained whilst we've made those. And then actually we talk about these things through the Stop and Search Working Group and all of those other mechanisms. Now, in addition to the Reasonable Grounds Panel, James Andronoff, who's online today, stipulated that he wanted 3 dip samples of each use of powers to happen every day. So we have got a dedicated resource that looks at 3 taser incidents, 3 stop and searches, 3 use of forces, and looks at whether what's been done is appropriate and suitable. So, for example, now the Chief Constable of Northants has given a lawful order to officers. Every stop and search that you conduct must be on body-worn video, because then we can go back and check and show the community and understand whether it's reasonable or not. Now, we've got a 96.7% compliance rate with that. And some of the reasons that for the 3% might be that the camera ran out of battery because they'd gone from place to place all day. But what we're doing now is we're fitting the cars out with recharging stations so that doesn't happen. And actually 96.7% compliance with body-worn video is a real strong position from where it was, 2 or 3 years ago, where it's probably 50%. So all of those things together with the question you've asked around reasonable grounds is the checks and balances we've got in place to make sure that each case with its nuances is looked at and considered to, would the average person say that that is reasonable? Now, one of the things that Gilly and I are working on with Scott Little is actually producing information for young people and anybody else that wants it, to tell them what their rights are, to tell them what reasonable should kind of feel like, what they should expect the officer to tell them, what they can say back to the officer or questions they could ask. And we're going to do that both physically and virtually and in a number of ways so that the community can understand exactly what their rights and entitlements are and what is reasonable.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Dennis, a lot. There are quite a few questions here for you. So I'm just gonna, while I've got you, I think I'm going to go. I'm going to go with asking you your questions and then moving through to everybody else. I think it's only fair rather than to keep bringing you back and forward. The next question that I have was another one, again, that was one that I jotted down. So I think everyone's on the same sort of wavelength for quite a lot of these questions. What was the practical, what did you implement it with practical moving forward that reduced the rate of 10 times 10 to 2.1 in regards to your conversation, your topics earlier?
So I think there was a number of things here. And the first thing was we took all the recommendations from Mike Shiner's report, and there was about 10, I think. And we built that into a work plan, which the Stop and Search Working Group have adopted. And that talks about building in governance. So with governance comes accountability. So an accountability structure that means that whoever's applying the use of powers, including stop and search, was held to account for it. So that included me as the lead for this area of working for James, where the community could hold us to account. We would dip sampling through the Reasonable Grounds Panel. We would dip sampling through the Stop and Search Working Group. If somebody was found to be breaching any of those things, such as not having it on body-worn video, then they may be challenged around misconduct. We were putting out messages, blogs. We bought additional body-worn cameras for officers. And actually just went on a real offensive around, and I say offensive in a way of targeting this. And if somebody made a stop and search, it was unreasonable, they had to go for additional training. If they had a second one, they were given a bigger input. And then if they had a third one, they had to come and really explain themselves as to why this kept happening. And we've never got to that stage yet. But a real strict accountability regime.
Dennis, just to go on for, so just so I understand, because that's something I think people would ask as well. So it's kind of like a 3 strikes rule that you have. what disciplinary outcomes are there with those 3 strikes? What comes with those 3 strikes?
Okay, so there's a number of things that could happen, and we have done this. Officers had their right to carry out stop and search removed until they'd gone through intensive training. If we felt it was serious enough, then there could be misconduct and discipline sanctions and investigations as a result of that. They could be double crewed with somebody. We could insist and have insisted that all of their searches would be on body-worn video, that they are double crewed, and a number of things, depending on what the issues were. If one of them was, for example, they're not writing down the grounds properly, then actually we would give them some input around the grounds. If we felt it was inappropriate or what's been watched on the video was something that actually breached the standards of professional behaviour, then we would report that through to our professional standards department, who would launch an investigation and investigate that formally. So there are a number of things depending on what the issues are. In the early stages, some of the issues were around, they'd have the grounds, but the way they wrote it down wasn't appropriate. But actually, you know, there are other ones where I viewed a video where the officers are supposed to tell you the grounds, the objects, show you their warrant card, tell you their identity, what police station they're at, the legal power they're using, your entitlement to the form. And I've seen one on body-worn video where they've said, we believe you're involved in drug supply, we're going to search you. That isn't acceptable. So that officer would get feedback around that. We'd go back through what the training is. If that happened again, there's no excuses. They've been told, they've had the input, they understand what's expected. And it's those checks and balances that we've put in place and the governance structure to hold it to account with a regular strategic meeting, a regular tactical meeting. So James will make sure that the mechanism is working. I will make sure that it's being delivered operationally, and the dedicated strand leads to make sure that the work has progressed that's led to the improvements. And whilst it's still not where I would want it to be, it's significantly better than what it was.
Thank you. What I want to do, I'm going to ask you 3 more questions, because I think it's only fair that I've got other questions for other people as well. And I don't want it just kind of be just consistently asking Dennis questions. So the next one I've got is just following on from that. What drives the racial disproportionality on stop and search, and what work will be done to reduce it?
Okay, so there's a number of hypotheses around this. So it's what we think is the issue. So I think you alluded to it, and Gilly as well. A lot of the work we do is probably in our most deprived areas, where our high crime areas are, and we know that those areas involve some of our minority communities. So whereas the population of Northants might be 9.6% BAME, actually in those areas it's 20 to 25% or more. So, but just by the very nature of the area you're targeting, you are likely to be targeting and meeting more minority communities who will get stopped as part of the process. In addition to that, we know that many of the groups that we're targeting for county lines and organised crime involve Black males within that group. Now, one of the pieces of work I'm currently doing, and it was a question raised out of the Stop and Search working group, is, well, if that's the case and you're working on intelligence, are you disproportionately collecting intelligence against the Black community as opposed to the white community? And the early indications of that, both locally and nationally, are probably yes. So we're now looking at what other white organised groups and county lines have we got, and are we getting the intelligence about them, and are we collecting our intelligence in the same way? And working through that hypothesis to see how that comes out. And we will present that to the Stop and Search working group, talk through all of those things and look at if there is a definite issue there, how do we then design that out? How do we make sure there's scrutiny and accountability to prevent that from happening? So because we're targeting those groups which are predominantly Black and in areas that have a high BAME percentage, that's why the Stop and Search and then going on to arrest, therefore going on to taser, therefore going on to use of force, you see that disproportionality follow through and become a trend across the whole criminal justice system. So I think that's certainly the sort of theory route that we're going down. That work is in its infancy, but it's something that we really want to progress. And as I said to you at the beginning, James has now given me a dedicated resource that will be working on that solely to progress that and accelerate the rate at which we understand what the data is telling us, so that we can make the changes necessary to make sure that communities aren't disenfranchised and disproportionately dealt with by our use of powers going forward.
Brilliant. I'm going to move on to one more question that I had, and it's what's being done during police training to combat unconscious bias.
Okay, so this is one that I'm glad you've asked, actually, because we looked at what was the Northants police version of stop and search training, and we weren't happy with it and we scrapped it. So we stopped that training, and the Chief Constable has now put in a dedicated role under Superintendent Olly Fealey-Sprague, who is working with Gilly and a number of people from the community on what's called our diversity and inclusion strategy. And that is looking at bias within everything that we do. So the first thing that they're doing is they're bringing in an external partner who will do a bias benchmark of where Northants Police sits. So Northants Police, all of its employees will do a bias assessment. It will tell us which departments have particular biases, what they are, what that looks and feels like as a benchmark to how we progress on from there. And then part of the training that we're designing is around communication. And many of the cases of issues we see around stop and search, use of powers, it all relates to communication and how the officer communicates with people within the community. So that is all being worked through. Gilly's involved in that. I think Amarjit Singh Atwal is involved with that, and a number of other key community members that are from communities affected by bias. Now, I think Gilly summed it up really well. What the police and organisations call bias, the community call racism, because actually that's how it translates when it's put into action. So we're working through that. Olly Fealey-Sprague is a dedicated role to that with a team. So I've given up from her role in local policing, Megan Say Tang, who works for Northants Police, but she's also an Asian female officer who is the chair of the Black Police Association. So some of the people designing this are from the very communities that are affected by disproportionality and the issues that we use. So there's a real commitment from the organisation to put finances into this, put resources into it, so that we start to understand it and get it right and change things for the better going forward. Sorry, you're on mute now, Will. It's my turn to say that.
That's better. There we go. Sorry. So that's, I've got one more question, and it's from, I'm going to absolutely butcher your name. I'm really sorry. Dushan, is that correct? Am I saying your name correctly? Is he there?
Yeah, I think that's Dushan, who's on the iPad in his car. Dushan? I think he was the chap that talked about getting stopped in the morning on the way back from the post office.
Yes,
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 that-
you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Dushan, do you want to ask your question before you
Yes,
have to go?
My question is, because I have been suffered within the COVID time, I have been stopped about 3 to 4 times. I'm a key worker, and basically, while I was going back to the work or back from work to the home, I've been stopped by the police. Nothing has been happened. Flashlight, stopped it, and oh, you're going back to the home? Yes, I'm going back to the home. I'm still in the uniform. Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's it. But that scar of physical, effect on my mind is that why I have been stopped. No reason for it. I'm working class, and I'm going back to the home from my work, paying the tax to the government, and that mental scar is still on my mind. So I can understand, the Taser, and the use of the Taser is effect on the physical side. But what about the mental side of the person who has been stopped without any reason? So
Yep.
what aspect are we doing as Northamptonshire Police to tackle these issues?
Okay, so what I would say in relation to that is that you're absolutely right in that, again, disproportionality followed through to the COVID side of things. One of the things that we found with COVID was around the white other group, that there was a large proportion of Eastern European community affected by COVID. We share that data with the Stop and Search Working Group because that's what probably the most suitable forum to bring that into. And actually, we've learned a lot of lessons from the first time round of COVID. So we have a key policy around engage and explain. So we're trying to do that and kind of encourage the community to, you know, link in and understand what we're asking them to do and why we're asking them to do it. We're doing that in different languages as well. But if you look at your scenario there, you know, they've stopped and dealt with you on those occasions, and that clearly affects you. And it's a common thing that comes through from the community that says, at some point we are tired and we get fed up having to explain ourselves around just going about our daily business. But there's a balance to be tread with what we're trying to do around this, and I think a lot of people have learned from the first COVID experience about what we do, how we did it, and how we would do it differently. And actually, James Andronoff, who's online today, is our lead for the COVID as well. He's been leading that in the last few months as we go forward. So all of that data is coming through. We're making sure that we've learned from the disproportionality data that came through the first time. Now, because it's such small numbers, for example, on the disproportionality around Asian, that related to 3 people that kept getting stopped in their car breaching it on 5 or 6 occasions. So we have to draw all of that data out and see what it looks like. But actually, if you've got any concerns about any of those things, please raise them at the time. I'm more than happy to have them looked at. Kev Mulligan, who works is the Northampton commander, will have those looked at. We shouldn't be, you know, stopping the same people lots of times if they're just going about their daily business. But there's no fine science to this. Part of this is around doing what they think is right, but there's lessons to be learned from it, and we're trying to learn those.
Dennis, I'm going to move on to Lorraine. Lorraine, if you want to ask a question, I'm going to go to you. You said your question kind of fed onto the back of the previous question.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I know that you're sort of saying, you know, the reasonable grounds panel is there and, you know, they're there for when stop and search. But like the gentleman just said before, my son has been stopped 3 times on the way to work, 10 to 6 in the morning, in his Morrison's outfit with his name badge, and asked, we're looking for somebody that looks like you. I doubt they're looking for somebody that's in a Morrison's outfit with the same name badge at 10 to 6 in the morning. However, you know, he doesn't get any paperwork for that. There is no reasonable grounds panel for that. He can't raise that in any way, shape or form. So while we're talking about stop and search, is there any audit for stop? Because that's what's happening to the community that I know. It's about stop, not stop and search, it's the stop. So is there any audit for that? And, you know, and how, like you said, you mentioned somebody's name, Kev Mulligan, that can be raised, because those things, like the gentleman just said before, do have an impact on our young people. You know, they haven't got a panel to go to, but they are stopped on a regular basis. And I just wanted to know what your take was on that.
So there's a couple of bits with this. The ultimate answer is that stop an account isn't recorded as a stop and search. But there are 2 elements to this. There's that first element around if somebody thinks that they are being regularly stopped and searched or stopped and asked to account and it's inappropriate, then I would encourage you to raise it through me, through any mechanism into the force, or through some of your community panels. So Gilly and various different people. And that's part of the know your rights information that we're going to be putting out now, because we know as well with young people, it's the 18 to 24 age bracket that are the high disproportionality figures within the stop and search data and stop an account. But secondly, one of the other things that is being looked at nationally is around the what they call section 1363 of the Road Traffic Act stops, where people will say that stopping your vehicle under the Road Traffic Act is a shortcut to stop and search, and that they don't record it in the same way. And some of the examples of that would have been the two famous athletes in London that were stopped under a road traffic stop, but actually when you listen to the narrative, it was a stop and search under any other name. At some point it progressed onto that, and that's part of the work that I'll be doing nationally with the National Stop and Search Lead. You've got a cat running across the back of you there, I can see. But with the National Stop and Search Lead to look at all of these things and how they can be improved. What I would say is that whilst they don't give you a form in Northants for stop and search, it's all done electronically, and it is more accurate than a stop and search form because it geofences the exact time, the exact location, and is much more accurate than the previous way we did it in giving out a singular form. But they're some of the things that are happening. They are happening really, really soon. We are almost at the stage now where we're ready to go out with the electronic and social media side of it for Know Your Rights. But if anybody on here or anywhere else feels like something that's happened to them is inappropriate, I would encourage you to raise it through many of the forums that you can now tap into that perhaps weren't there 12 months ago.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Christian. Christian has a question, so I'm going to open it up to Christian to ask the question.
Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to speak to the audience. I just want to come back to this type of mechanism that the police have put in place in order to tackle these issues. So including taser, use of force, stop and search, use of power, whatever we want to name them. So I think the Northampton Right and the Equality Council has suggested 9-point plan to try to address these issues, because looking at the data, we see that these constraints, these trends are still growing up. And I think those 9 points that are being as a suggestion, I think will help to tackle these issues, such as I've seen how can we try to ensure that this attitude and the belief in respect to race, ethnicity are solved. I'll give an example of schools, because I've got children who are of the age of 7 and 4, but and 5. When they're talking to you, you understand that they have started already witnessing something. And these are issues that we need to tackle. So myself, I've seen another one that the Northampton Right and Equality Council has proposed. At workplace, how can we put audit and equality rights to tackle all of this? I've worked myself within the probation services. I know what I'm talking about. So I'm just comparing this mechanism that I've just listed down previously, the taser, use of force. Indeed, the police have to carry on doing their jobs. But I compare this as a website, as a company website that might be looking very beautiful. But if the mechanism, the component of that website is not strong, so the website at any point it will strike down. And I think this is what we are going through. So I think the government need to try to invest further in these institutions, try to find out how can we tackle these issues from the bottom point. That's just a suggestions, because if we keep just talking about all this mechanism, so I don't see whether this problem will be sorted out. So it's just a suggestion. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you. I'm going to put forward now, I'm going to ask one question here that was quite a good one. It's from Chet Johnson. Chet, do you want to ask the question yourself, or would you like me to read it out?
You can go ahead, please.
No problem. Chet's question is, could go to Dennis or it could go to James, surrounding tasers. As I understand, tasers are being imposed on all Northants officers by national politicians, maybe for political advantage. Some police will be more receptive to training, some less. Some police will have less pristine disciplinary records than others. What plans are there to withhold taser equipment for less capable and less disciplined officers?
Okay, James, do you want to answer that? Or do you want me to answer that?
I'm happy to take if you want. If you want, Dennis, you've been doing a lot of talking.
Yeah, sure.
So just to clarify, the taser, this isn't a kind of queue, which form an orderly queue and everybody gets a taser. The officers have to pass the training, which is a very rigorous set of training, which is scrutinised at national level. It's based on a national template, and they're coming out and inspecting forces, delivering that to make sure we're delivering that taser training in the right way. And certainly when we've been checking our training recently, we're really satisfied that it's delivered to a very high standard, and in fact it's delivered on a regional basis shared with Leicestershire and Lincolnshire Police, so we're getting some real consistency.
James,
but go on.
So
sorry.
can I ask, just going into on the training, because you've raised the question that popped into my head, and it'll feed into the rest of the question.
It will, yeah.
Is there what's being done on that within that training to combat any kind of unconscious bias or racial bias that a officer may have?
Well, I think that's where we're lacking across the board, actually, not just in relation to taser training, but in relation to all aspects of use of force and communications training. Let me just come back to that in a second, Will, because I think it's a really important point. So the standard that's required of an officer to carry a taser is a very high one. They're not just distributed out to all officers. So we're already satisfied that we've actually got a very high standard in place. They're not just being dished out. There is also then scrutiny into every single one of the taser discharges. They're all reviewed by our firearms team, who are trained to a much higher standard to scrutinise that. And as Dennis said, I've introduced a range of additional dip sampling of 3 taser discharges a day. In fact, we don't even have 3 taser discharges a day. We have about 5 or 6 a month. So 100% of those will be being looked at. So that I hope gives some reassurance around the level of scrutiny we've got around taser. And within the last quarter, up to the end of August, we had 11 discharges, so about 11 a quarter, so maybe 50 odd a year is what we're looking at the moment, of actual the weapon being the trigger pulled and the barbs actually being discharged. So in relation to the question, Will, around unconscious bias, I don't think this is an area we do well. I'll be frank, I've been trained in officer safety training for 29 years now. That's training based on handcuffs and battens and so on. I'm not taser trained. And essentially the training has started with, anyway, you've done your operational communications, now get your baton out. And the muscle memory that I think we train officers in starts at the point of teaching them the tactics to use force. And we give refresher training in relation to how to drive fast cars, how to use battens and cuffs, how to shoot guns, how to interview people, and all sorts of other stuff. We don't give refresher training in how to have positive resolutions and positive interactions with people, whether it's stop and search or anything else for that matter. And that's where I think unconscious bias meets cultural awareness, meets communications training, meets emotional intelligence, meets how to have a positive outcome in a normal conversation, how to de-escalate things, and then meet somewhere with officer safety training. And so we are exploring, as part of our diversity, equality and inclusion agenda linking with the use of powers, how we can get members of the public involved in helping to shape that training, because I think people like Jenny and Gilly would quite rightly criticise us for having delivered training in the past that was tick in the box, and I fundamentally do not want to do that. This is got to be a shift in behaviour and a much more deeper understanding of how we interact with people.
I think to follow on from that, it's something that's come up in the chat just before I move on to the next person. It's the bias towards the criminalisation of cannabis and cannabis being used as a crux almost to implement stop and search, or to have reasons to stop and search that disproportionately affect young black men, myself included. I've been stopped countless times here and in London for reasons that are bewildering, absolutely bewildering, but it is what it is. It's part and parcel of living in the UK at the moment. The problem that I find, that I'm glad that you admitted that there's not much being done at the moment in terms of unconscious bias, but that scares me that nothing's being done, because it's come out and said that I'm going to get it wrong, but is it the superintendent that's in charge of the whole of Northamptonshire County Police Force? I can't remember his name.
Chief Constable Nick Adderley.
Yeah, he came out and said that Northamptonshire Police is inherently racist. So I am worried that nothing will get done.
Will, what did you say the chief said? Sorry.
He said that he admits that there's racism within the police force.
Oh, okay.
I don't know when that was, Will. I'd like to see exactly what he said.
No, that's exactly what he said. He said that Northants Police, you do have racist police officers. That's a fact.
So
I don't know what he said. I'd have to look at what he said, but yeah.
I can find it and get it to you. It's
sure
that worries me. It worries me. It worries me that these things, that it seems that you and Dennis and a few others that seem to care enough to want to get things done, will it actually be done, is the question that I have.
Dennis, I'll take this as my last one because it's your show, not me. So it's only the chief constable really above me in the organisation, and the chief needs to have members of his senior team to do stuff on his behalf. So I'm a very senior person in the organisation. I believe passionately in this, and we've listened carefully to a lot of the feedback from communities, from the work that Mike Shiner and the team did, and we want to get this right. So it's being led from the top. It's being led by the chief has asked me to lead it personally. I take it very personally. It's my energy that's going into it, as well as the whole team around me. So this is a significant team effort, Will. It really is. Thank you.
I'm going to ask Muna Kali to come in. She's the next up in line to ask a question. Thank you, Chet, for putting that in the chat as well. It's there, the Chief Constable on racism. It's there for anyone to go and look at if they like. But Muna, if you want to, I hope you're pronouncing your name right. If you want to come in and ask your question now.
Yeah, yes, you did. Thank you so much, Will, giving me and also giving me the platform. I'm solely here to basically feed this back to my community, to the young people which I represent, especially within the Somalian community. And I think a year and a half or so back, I brought in a young man that was stopped and searched, and that was wrongly stopped and searched because he was on his way to his school to pick up his children, and he was stopped and searched by undercover cops. And basically, he had a camera, and all of this was passed on to Lara, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And basically, with all of that information, I don't know what had happened to it. I mean, this lad has been left mentally unstable. He doesn't want to come forward anymore. I had a couple of conversations with Gillian about this. Gilly, sorry. And I am so really fuming because at the minute I work with these young men and they have their own kind of group and everything developed. They are so they're really looking forward to this future of this Black young man growing up into this society, and also wanting to not only to be looked at, Black young people are only problem makers, and as soon as they step out of their door, they get stopped and searched, and just because they're Black, they get stopped and searched. And it's so frustrating because I can't now get any of them to come and join these kind of meetings or anything like that. So then they can represent themselves and tell their story, because they have absolutely lost faith within the policing. Because I don't know how to process this, but it is so painful. It's killing me as a Black woman to see what is happening to these young Black men, and not to having a voice for them. I thought it was unfair. So that's why I share their story and their background to yourselves. I'm more than happy to feedback to anybody that wants to know any more kind of specific information. But what sort of, what I wanted to understand is that, because obviously I think Gilly put it very well in perspective in terms of everything that she said. I literally echo that. But what I want to understand is that how we can build back the trust of these young people that can have the relationship with the police, which I don't know it's ever going to happen, but for them to have this voice, for them to have this drive, and to be able to, I don't ever think that stop and search ever is going to be stopped. And when you said, Dennis, that Northampton is been looked at as the very good policing in terms of like within the country, I believe, in terms of the stop and search. I think, because going back to that, I think that is wrong, because I don't see that. I mean, I haven't learned from the police that they are doing a good job in terms of the stop and search. And I would love to see more work, more cohesion, more kind of young people drawn into this, because it is all about the young people. It is about the young people having to have their voice, having to have, the support and the system that they need.
I'll just add to that. There's a disconnect, I think, personally, between the police and anyone of Black origin, of BAME, within the BAME community. I think there's a disconnect. I've got a few Somali friends, I've got a few Albanian friends, I've got a few Asian friends of all different ethnicities and backgrounds. And apart from my white friends, they all have a distrust towards the police. So what's being done to combat that is something that I'd add to on the back end of what Rooney was saying.
Okay, I'd like to share a little bit of my story and then talk to you about that. I mean, I joined the police in 1992, and my parents were absolutely dead against me joining the police, because when my brother was at school, he got bullied. He had a nervous breakdown. He was found under the stairs painting himself white because he thought that would solve his problems. And at that time, the police said, well, it's school bullying. There's nothing we can do about it. And my parents said, if you join the police, we'll disown you. But I took that step forward to join it because I wanted to be able to change it. Now, when I joined the police in 1992, my sister was racially attacked by a neighbour. The police turned up. My brothers were there. My brothers got arrested. And then it eventually went to court. They were found not guilty. And the guy that actually committed the attack was found guilty. So I get a lot of the things that people say and hear about this stuff. But actually not hearing it from me. Gilly is one of the community members on this group to hold us to account. And Gilly will probably tell, and I won't put words into her mouth, but I'm sure Gilly can tell you the progress we're making, how we're planning to engage with young people. I've done a lot of work with Rumby to engage young people. And that's not just locally, because there was young people on there that started to talk about things that happened in Nottingham and Liverpool. I actually got Nottinghamshire Police and Merseyside Police to get involved in that. So what I would say to the councillor is, you know, link in with Rumby. Rumby will tell you how she set those things up, and we will come and engage with them. One of the undertakings I gave to Gilly, James, and this group and Jenny is, just because I'm going off to a different role, I've got kids that live in Northants. They're from a BAME background. I don't want them being disproportionately stopped and searched, or use of force, or anything else. So I'm happy to carry on the work with Gan Thionithy, who will be in Northants, and actually I've said to James, any of the good practice that we pick up from developing the national work, Northants is going to be the first place it comes back to, because this is my hometown. But just to put the record right in relation to the good feedback we've had, what we've been given good feedback about is you are progressing this at a faster rate than other people. That's not to say that what we are doing is good and great and it's fixed all the problems, but we're putting the structures and processes in place that the likes of Mike Shiner has recommended. The Rights Equality Council delivered a presentation, and we've taken the points from that. The Stop and Search Working Group, and we've built that into a work plan that will now form the next 12 months of how we're going to progress things. James Andronoff has funded an away day for the group, and we were meant to go, but because of COVID, we had to halt it, to develop that work plan into action, to take it off the page and start to make these changes. So what I'm not saying is Northants Police is brilliant, it's the best, we don't have any of these issues. But the feedback I'm getting is you are starting to put things in place that will have a positive effect on what you're doing and its effect on the community. And actually, we want people to be part of that journey. That's why I want to be involved in these sort of things. That's why James is here. That's why Gilly's bought into this, because I believe that Gilly can see that. Gilly, can I come to you now to just give us your thoughts on what you've seen since you came into this role?
Well, before I became community co-chair, my concern was that there's a lot of meetings with people from the police, but also the community, arguing about crumbs as opposed to slices of the bread. And what I mean by that, when I did my intro, I talked about the fact that I'm concerned about the silent majority who are being targeted by the police, and then Leslie, I think her name was, and then Muna, and also the other brother, I can't remember his name, so I apologise. He also described being stopped while wearing his key worker uniform. And fundamentally, my concern is still the same. The progress part, Will, that you talked about in terms of what is Northants Police doing about the bias. Myself and Rumby and Amajit and Neelam, we've all been asked to work with the police. Elliot Foskett, he's the superintendent, that's the lead that Dennis described. Now, I have had 2 dialing conversations with the external professional psychologist that does all this kind of biased testing with the police. And they've had to reevaluate what I'm prepared to get involved in. And I said to them, it's not about bias for us, it's about racism, so stop calling it bias. And it's not about your frontline officers, it's the whole force. That includes your special constables as well. And the reason I said it had to be the whole force was because an example that I gave them that they understood was this. So a white male or female control room officer takes a call from a member of the public and says the following: oh, you need to come because there's a gang of black kids and they're drinking, and I think they're armed, and I think they're doing drugs. Now the white control room officer has can do 2 potential responses. The non-biased response is to say, Madam, sir, can you confirm why you think these young people are a gang? And what evidence have you got that they're armed and that they're involved in drugs? That's the non-biased questioning of the member of the public. The biased questioning of the control room officer is the following: yes, I will send out officers. How many gang members are there? And can you see what kind of weapons they've got? So when I described that to Elliot and Dr. Peter Jones, they both said I was absolutely right, that actually, whatever bias training happens, it's got to be operational. So whether you work in the control room or you're a special constable or you're a police, it doesn't matter what you do, the whole force has to undergo a rigorous approach to the implications of bias that becomes an action, and the action is a racist action, because the impact on people that look like me and Dennis and Jenny, etc., is, and Muna and Leslie, is that we see the effect of that bias. So a thought that becomes an action, it's a racist action, and it's very simple for us. Now, one of the things that Elliot's going to do, and unfortunately because of COVID, both him and Megan and others, they haven't been able to focus on moving things forward in the way that we would want. But what Dennis and I are committed to doing, and it will be the same with GAN, the work programme has got to reflect what Northamptonshire Police are doing in relation to the stop and search, use of powers, use of force data. There's no point in us challenging and scrutinising via the SSWG what the police are doing if that is not taken back into the operational changes that need to happen. Now, Elliot said that he would like to see Northamptonshire Police within 10 years being institutionally inclusive. Now, that's quite an aim, and all I can say is good luck. But what we will try to do is help them to understand what it means to be a black person, particularly males within and I'm using the term black politically, not because I don't really recognize the BAME as a description. I know that when I'm walking down the street, if I get shouted at by some white racists, they're not calling me you BAME whatever, they're using hopefully just the word black, but you know there's potentially a word that begins with N and finishes with the word R. Now, as a community, non-white British people within Northamptonshire, one of the things that we need within the Stop and Search working group is to have more voices from not just young people. Currently, we don't have anybody who's part of the SSWG who's from the Muslim community. We don't have anybody from young people dialing in. Jenny speaks on behalf of young people, so does Rumby, but we actually need young people, and that's why we've committed to recruiting the youth engagement coordinator and creating this youth council. But the thing that resonates with what you just said, what you've been saying, Will, all night, is young people need to see that there's a potential that they can go about their lawful business. Young male adults actually, because it's not young, because I'm aware, and Muna has hinted at it, there are adults who are just going to, just to collect their children from school, and they're being targeted. And that's what I said in my introduction. It's not about the police. Every part of our life has an impact. And if you go, and the brother who talked about the emotional impact, one of the things that the young people have said to us is, when they are stopped outside their school with their mates, it's the shame element that comes with that, because all they were doing was walking home with their friends, and if they're 6 friends, Will, two are black and 4 are white, the white kids aren't being stopped and searched, it's the black kids, so they feel shamed in front of their own mates. And that is something that you go home. Some of the young people will tell their parents about it, some of them won't. And Muna alluded to that, because we've been talking about this, and I've tried to talk to her brother, and he doesn't want to engage, because he doesn't feel that anything will change. So it's not just about rebuilding trust, it's more fundamental, it's building trust, because for some communities there is no trust with the police at all, because they've either personally experienced it, or a family member has, or a friend, or their friends tell them about something. And the thing that young black people and young black males and male black males have in common is the shared feeling of, why is it me all the time? And we're tired of it. And as sistren, I've only ever been stopped twice driving my car. I can share this with you because it happened quite a long time. So me and my mates we were going to London, and as usual, I'm driving. Cut a long story short, one of our friends, there was 4 of us in this car. One of my friends, she was late getting ready. So anyway, so we were meant to be in North London or wherever by midnight to go to this club. So we left later. So I drove down just under 70 miles an hour most of the time. Okay, most of the time. And a police car, an unmarked police car flashing, drove past me, and I automatically didn't even realize it was an unmarked police car. I flashed him because he was that close to my wing mirror. So they flashed for us to pull over, and I thought they were going to say to me I was speeding, but actually they apologized and they said, you guys okay? Sorry, we were speeding. I won't tell you what speed I was doing, but anyway, it was over 70. That was the only time. The only other time I've been stopped in Northampton was 3 years ago. I was out with one of my best friends, Jenny. It was like the night before Christmas Eve. We'd been out at socialite, so I was driving, again, not drinking. And on the way to where we were going, we saw a drink and drive session going on opposite Carlsberg. So we joked about, oh God, what are they doing now? Anyway, I dropped her home. I went a different way home. Don't know why I did it. God must have been watching over me. So I went back there. I got flashed to pull over, and I'm doing like less than 30 miles an hour. So I pulled over, and this young police constable tapped my window, and I wound it down, and he said, have you been drinking tonight, madam? I said, no, I don't drink and drive. Why are you asking me that? And he said, well, we're doing a drink and drive. I said, I'm glad that you're doing it, but I never drink and drive. I never drink and drive, okay? So he then said, can you show me your driving license? So I said, I'm happy to do that, but just confirm to me why you've stopped me, because I wasn't speeding. I wasn't driving erratically. So what's the problem? And the sergeant came over and he said, what's going on? What's going on? What's the problem? I said, well, I'm just asking your constable why he stopped me. And as I've got out of the car, I'm now looking up and down. Every single vehicle, including 2 trucks, we're all black people. So what's going on? Oh no, madam, it's not racial profiling. I said, isn't it? So you're really telling me that in a county where we're the minority, the only people that you've stopped tonight, and there's 10 cars here and 2 vans, and every single person is black. So they apologize. I said, no, don't apologize. I need your car. I need to know where you're based. Anyway, I said, I'm happy to do your alcohol test you want me to do. And then the sergeant said, have you been smoking, madam? I said, yeah. He said, no, we can't do it. You'll get a false positive. Don't worry about it. Have a good night. I said, no, don't go. I need your card because I need to speak to the senior officer block I mentioned, because I knew him from my work at the county council. Oh no, you don't need to make him. I said, I just need your card. Okay, I'll think about what I'm going to do. Those are the only 2 times that I have been stopped. My son, when he was 13, everybody, in his NSB, Northampton School for Boys uniform, was stopped outside our house. We live 10 minutes from NSB. He called me, because it was like 3:30 in the afternoon. He said, Mum. So I came out, I'm thinking, what's going on? Went up to the police officer in this car. I said, why have you stopped my son outside our house? Oh, we've had a report of burglaries in the area. What, were they wearing an NSB uniform while they were doing it? Well, and I said, well, okay, what time were these burglaries happening? Oh, between 12 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Oh, right, so when my son's at school. Right, okay, I need to know who you are, and I want your card. So I'm going to make a phone call. So I rang a certain detective, chief inspector at the time, and I rang him, and he knew Antoine. He'd seen Antoine doing loads of stuff, and he said, let me talk to them. So he tore his officers off a strip. But my son was brought up by me to always know how to conduct himself, Will, with the police. So I always told him and his mates, no point in you kicking off, just make a note of their badge number and where they're based and why they've stopped you, and then just ring me or your parents, and one of us will come and collect you all. So him and his friends always knew how, but he also had some friends who didn't know what to do. So some of them got angry, rightly so, and upset, and they got a different response from the police. But I've always said to people, know that you have limited power, because the police are wearing a uniform, and if they want to behave in a certain way, even if you're innocent, going about your business, just don't give them a reason to manhandle you or treat you differently. And one of the things that we need to do in this county is make sure that all the different youth-related organisations, BAME Heritage, Black Heritage, whatever, they link up the young people online. best time to do is during COVID, because the kids don't need to be meeting each other, but they need to know that it doesn't matter where they, so if they live in the south of the county or Oundle or wherever, they can link up with other and share things and support each other. And our youth engagement coordinator will, and everybody else, and the youth council will be the formal structure that we use to give these young people a voice. And I don't know if in 2 years' time, some of these young people might want to consider a career in the police. But I told Dennis and James, no point in you recruiting 10 BAME heritage black young people, 10's not enough. You need to recruit a minimum of 50 and place them together. So when they walk into the canteen or they go out on a shout, the person next to them looks like them. And the thing that I told Dennis and Elliot, whatever training you do in terms of identifying the bias that's becoming racism, you've got to make sure that if a white sergeant is with a new recruit who happens to be black BAME heritage, and that young constable sees his supervisor behaving in a racist way, where is his power to challenge his direct supervisor? So I've told Dennis and Elliot, you need to have somebody at chief inspector level / superintendent who the new recruit of Will Reid can go, when he goes off duty, he can ring somebody and be protected from being targeted by the racist canteen culture. And Northamptonshire police aren't any different to any other police. And it doesn't matter whether the police are prepared to acknowledge that that's what is happening. It's because this is what is so important. You can't build trust without young people being involved in the conversation about why they don't trust the police in the first place. I'm sorry if I've gone on, but this, tonight
it's okay.
3 different people confirm what I said about being targeted just because they've left their house to go to work. This is totally unacceptable. Thank you.
Cheers, Jenny. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Jenny, and then after Jenny, Paul, if you want to wrap up with any questions that you have. Actually, sorry, not Paul. We're going to go Jenny, we're going to go Michael, and then we're going to have Paul wrap up. Well, I know we've gone over our allotted time, so if anyone has to go, please do. But if anyone's got any questions for anybody quickly, let's get them out now. So Jenny, if you want to go and get your question out.
Thank you, Will. Is it possible if I could ask you to actually read out the question? But before you read out the question, can I just put some context behind the question? Is that okay? So, was it this week? No, it was last week. We were fortunate enough, the young people of Inspiration FM, we did a debate involving one representative of Northants Police, which was James, and Steve Mould, the commissioner. It's a shame that James isn't here, because I think I must be his worst nightmare, because he probably sees it as that Jenny's got nothing positive to say about the police. But what I can say is I did a feedback session with the young people because I wanted to kind of find out how they felt the debate had gone. One bit of good news and one bit of bad news. So the good news is they're going to do part 2. So they would like to do another debate with Northants Police, but this time they'd like to invite Dennis and James, which I thought is fantastic. The only thing is that I had to persuade them. And the reason why I had to persuade them, and that's because the feedback that I got from them originally was using young people as a platform to get your message across. So when I say we're talking about the police. So that was the census of the debate. And they also came away with the fact that nothing's ever going to change. And I think that concerns me even more, because then if we put in the time, that's Rumby, that's Gilly, that's Muna, anyone that's working free to talk with young people, if we get these young people round the table and then whatever they say, the police, they agree with them. And now you think that's a good thing, but actually it's not a good thing, because you think they agree with them, and then you think that they're actually going to get something done because you've actually agreed with us. But really and truly, they kind of feel as if you've agreed with them just for you to, as young people, stop talking. And then all that work that's been put into, it's just been a waste of time, because that's how they will come away from that discussion. So after that, so as I said, there's good news and bad news. So Will, can you read the question? And the question is to Mike Shiner. Your mic's not on.
Bloody hate this mic thing. Sorry, guys. So the question is, does Mike think, in his opinion, does he feel like more BAME police officers would make a difference? As feedback from young people says no, says that having more BAME police officers wouldn't actually make a difference. Mike, are you there?
I think Mike's left.
Oh gosh, his name's still there.
Yeah, I think Mike's left.
Dennis, do you want to take the question?
Yeah, do you know what?
Instead of Dennis, can Olly take it? Is he equipped to take it? Can Olly take it? His mic.
Right, I'm on. I've managed to unmute myself in three movements. Right, so okay. I'm going to say probably Mike would disagree with me because it's not something I know a huge amount about, but I'm going to say the answer to that is yes. And I'm saying that because from my own peer group and my own area of work, human rights work, it's incredibly white, and we've been on a steep learning curve around some of the issues that have been faced by our colleagues and peers, and we think that BAME issues are, particularly black issues, are very underrepresented in our sector in terms of the people that work in the sector, and we're trying to rectify that now by being better, by addressing the issues in a better way, using the word racism, not using the word disproportionality, talking about issues that address communities. And I think what I would say is that I think I've been an adult 33 years legally anyway, if we're saying 18 is the yardstick. I have never been stopped and searched in that entire 33 years. I think I've been vehicle stopped for having a light out or something, but for stop and search, never. I don't know a single black colleague, whether that's Dawn Butler as the MP, whether that's a senior lecturer at Sheffield University that helps us do some of our work on gang profiling, whether it's lawyers, solicitors from particularly black communities who have not been stopped and searched multiple times. And that's a reality that white people have to accept. And the only way we can address that is to bring those voices more into the system and tackle systematic racism from that perspective. So I think in a short way, even though I've grandstanded a bit, I think representation is key and is important, and we must do better across all sectors.
Thank you. What I would feed off of what Olly said before we go to Dennis quickly, before we move on to Mike, is it's not about just recruiting BAME police officers or them being PCs and then working their way up that way. It needs to be on the backroom staff level, or the decision maker, the decision maker level, because it's all well and good having 50 new black and Asian police officers or Eastern European police officers, but if they're not at a level where they can make any real difference for any decisions, it makes no difference. So I think that's feeding off of what Jenny said. I think that's where kids would look at it, is like, because to me, till I've got to about this age, this adult age of big 31, I always saw the police as the guys that stop and search me. I didn't think of people in Dennis's position. I didn't think of people, I didn't really even associate the people that answer the phone as being part of the police service. So it's putting people of black and ethnic minority groups in positions of power to be able to implement these changes, because until that's done, we can just go round and round in circles and have these conversations. Dennis, do you want to add something?
Dennis, the only thing is, well, from the mindset of a young person, from their perspective, and that's what we're talking about here, they feel that the police is so damaged, something like that won't even necessarily make a difference. What I'm hoping, because one of their tasks is to make a podcast out of the 1 hour long debate, that was one of the questions that was actually posed to the police officers. So hopefully you'll be able to actually hear the response that the young people gave, and how articulate that they came across, because they're very clear when they say, because it just seems it makes sense in terms of what Olly said and what Gilly said. It makes sense to me, but from a young person's perspective, they feel that there's so much damage when you're talking about the police, not just Northants police, the police as a whole. They feel that that's not the solution, and when they're then tabling the solution, they're made out that, yes, we agree with you, but then they're not taking up on anything that they're tabling or suggesting. So then, unfortunately, they come away with that whole attitude, which is what Muna was saying, they're not interested. And the chance of you getting them around the table again, it's not going to happen. So for me, the mindsets of police officers at senior level needs to change. They need to be in a position whereby if a young person's going to table something, don't think about, you need to be thinking about how you're going to get it done, not the fact that you're just going to brush it off because you can, because you're in a decision-making position. Think about what they've brought to the table, and then go away and think about how you're going to achieve it. So then young people can actually say, right then, I've done something and they've followed it through. Maybe I'll go to the next one.
Dennis, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, Will, I couldn't agree with what you're saying more. And actually, part of the new role I've got is to go and actually try and achieve that. One of the and actually those positive role models within this to send out a message to those young people are probably there in the minority, but they're not maximized. So getting a chief superintendent rank might seem the norm for the average police officer, but I've had radio stations and TV companies and all sorts of things ring me to try and proffer me up as somebody who is a groundbreaking black person. Well, actually, the police service has got hundreds of chief superintendent jobs, but they see that as so significant because somebody has come through and made that. Now, there are a number of people, and there's two deputy chief constables and a chief constable from the black community who were all children in care at some point, and they've gone on to make really good and influence. And actually, those stories and those narratives need to be put out there for these young people to understand that coming from a poor background or an underprivileged background isn't a barrier to this. I was born in Corby. My father died when I was 13. I was a free school meals child. Now I'm going to be a chief superintendent in charge of the national portfolio on stop and search, changing things for the community. And actually getting those messages out. And when I sat on Rumby's group, one of the messages to the children is the way to change this is to get into a position to influence policy and decision making. And actually the police service is now looking at that chasm in the middle. So getting PCs and sergeants from a minority community is not bad, but that inspector to senior leader, there's a massive gap, and it's really difficult. And again, the disproportionality plays out within that part of policing. So the police service now is waking up to this, because actually it all links to Black Lives Matter, stop and search, use of powers, representation within the force.
To feed onto that, there was a question that was asked earlier: has Black Lives Matter impacted on Northamptonshire Police's view on how they're going to tackle implementing more superintendents, more sergeants, more people of decision-making power from BAME communities? Is that something that's going to get done?
Massively. So if you look in the last few weeks, and I'm involved in a mentoring program. Ganthai Ithi has just been promoted to chief inspector. You've got Mikey Wright, who's there. We've just promoted 3 PCs to sergeant from minority groups, and we're bringing people through. There's no doubt about it. The representation's still not there because it's about 3.6 in Northants, whereas the population's 9.6, and that's based on 2011 census data, so that's probably out of date as well. So there's a long way to go, and actually with the 20,000 uplift in police officers, that presents a massive opportunity to start.
So is there a time? Is there a time scale on when, or is there a target of an amount of BAME officers, or is there a mandate or something that's going to be in place to say we're going to look at getting this amount of officers, we're going to be looking to train this amount of people within the hierarchy of the structure of the police force in Northamptonshire to help combat and make decisions for the better for all communities? Is that something that's being done? Is there going to be a mandate out?
Absolutely, yes. So if you look at, for example, the plan that Paul Crofts and then the Rights Equality Council sent through to Northants Police, Elliot Foskett has written back to Paul to acknowledge receipt of that, and they are going to give the Rights Equality Council a full breakdown of what the plan is to deliver against some of the things that have been raised there, because actually not all of those things were about Northants Police. And there is what we a DEI strategy, so diversity and inclusion strategy, which Gilly and others are working on with Northants Police to pull all of this into a plan to put that out to the community, so that with that openness comes scrutiny for the community to hold us to account.
I don't think you've answered the question.
Okay, tell me which bit, Jenny?
Because you said, do you have the numbers? But what you've said is that there's a plan. So in other words, you don't.
Do I have the, well, what they will aim for is to be representative of the communities we serve. So Northamptonshire has a 9.6 BAME population. So the minimum they will aim for is 9.6 representation for BAME within Northants Police. But actually that isn't capped at 9. They're not going to stop at 9.6. Actually, we know that you have ebbs and flows, and the numbers that come in, you know, you don't retain everybody. They move on to other forces. It's like now with me, I'll be moving on to another force, so I would come off the numbers. So it's a constantly moving picture, but the target they will look at is representation to match the community of Northamptonshire.
And what's the time frame? What's the turnaround time? Because that was Will's question as well, as in the turnaround time for that to be.
So they have to recruit. I'm trying to think. By next year, they've got to get up to 1550, which are police officers. At the minute, there's about another 100 officers to recruit coming in. So within that figure, they're not going to achieve 9.6 with the numbers of officers that they are allowed to recruit that are left. There's no doubt about that. So it is a constantly moving picture. But I know that on the last intake, it was about 17%. The cadet scheme, which is one of our feeder routes, has got about a 20% BAME recruitment figure. So it's trying to draw some of those things in to the structures. But there's no doubt about it. In the time frame that we've got left with the officers we're allowed to recruit, we will not hit the figure of representing Northants for BAME in the percentages, because we are so far away from it now that the numbers won't match.
Okay. Thank you, Dennis. I'm going to move on to Michael Vaughan. I know you had a question. We waited a little while. Michael, are you there? Sorry, he was on the phone. Michael? Hi, Michael. Oh, you was on. You just put yourself back on mute, mate.
Off mute.
There we go. You're off now. There we go.
Now, some of the people that would have answered this have gone now, but
apologies.
It was something that other questions were mentioning about the word reasonable, and ever since I went to university 40 years ago, I've always thought that word, I believe, based on the man on the Clapham omnibus, what was reasonable to him, note him, not him or her, but I think that reasonable is responsible for a lot of problems. I always thought that from when I was at uni. So should it be removed and changed to something else, more defining what these things should be rather than just saying reasonable?
Who's that directed towards, Michael?
Well, I'm not sure who can answer it now. But I mean, whether Dennis wants to try.
So what we do with the reasonable grounds panel is we ask people that have been stopped and searched, that have an interest in stop and search, that come from various communities. So the demographic and the age group and the range of people is very different. So it would not be, as Michael's suggesting in this case, that, you know, that average white English man that sits on that group. And what we don't do is say to them, these are the criteria for what is reasonable grounds. What we will say to them is, this is what the authorized professional practice says, but please watch that video, read the form, understand what's been happening, and to you, does that seem reasonable? So each person's version of reasonable will be slightly different, but actually what we found with this is that the public are probably less strict than the police in these cases, and they'll go, and Sally Trattle, who runs some of these for me, will say, the public will go, well, that looked reasonable, and she'll go, yeah, but it's not reasonable, and this is why it's not reasonable, and they haven't done this, and they haven't said that, and the people that are running this are probably harsher than some of the community, but the reasonableness of it goes right across a broad spectrum. We do not have just somebody from X community or Y, and actually the benefit of this is having people on there who have been stopped and searched and been affected by this has been really useful in learning not just about whether it's reasonable or not, but the communication part that we talked about earlier is a big part of what upsets people. It's not what happened, it's how it happened, and the way they were spoken to and the way they were dealt with. And that's a big part of what we're trying to change going forward, because research shows us that people will either be upset by a stop and search, or the best you can hope for is that they walk away feeling neutral about it. So they're never going to walk away. Sorry,
go on.
They're never going to walk away going, I've been stopped and searched and that felt great and I'm really happy. They're either going to go, I was stopped and searched and I was treated okay, or that was really bad and I feel I've been treated poorly and targeted.
To touch on that just quickly, every time I've been stopped and searched, it's always been under the assumption that I've done something wrong before I've been able to prove my innocence. Every time, like without fail. Doesn't matter if I've been a passenger in a car. Doesn't matter with anything. It's always been guilt first, and then they figure out whether the guilt is actually there by asking me questions. What's before I pass over to Paul to finish up? What's been done in those first interactions? Because I'm not being funny. If I was to be stopped, and right off the bat, like, look, the reason I've stopped you is X, Y, and Z, without pretense or without assumption, and was done in a correct and polite way, I don't think people, and body cam is going to be on, like you indicated, body cams will be worn throughout Northamptonshire police force, and there's been a 96.2% inclusion rate on that, I think you said, from all officers. What's being done on the stop and search first interaction level?
Okay, so the first thing, the way you described it there, they've done it in the opposite way. Stop and search, the reason that was brought in was to prevent the unnecessary arrest of people. But the first part of that is about stop and account. So ask them questions to establish whether what they're saying is reasonable, and you know, exploring what that person's there about. We see this time and time again where people get stopped and actually they go to the first phase. We've seen it in the national press where people have had their car forced to be stopped and various different things and swooped on the car when actually a discussion at the early stage might have been the way forward. So what have we done about it in Northants? We're working on the new communication and bias training. We've done the scrutiny and dip sampling, as well as the reasonable grounds panel and the work of the stop and search group. But in the ultimate cases, I have referred things through to the professional standards department to say, I need you to look at this and assess it to see whether or not any misconduct or gross misconduct offences have happened. And in some cases, they have found misconduct, and that has been dealt with through the discipline procedure. So those are the sorts of things that happen and are in place. But that isn't the same across each force, and it differs from police force to police force.
Right now, I don't care about any other force other than Northampton. Where is Northamptonshire?
No, that's okay. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Just
Will,
before
can I say something?
Yes, go ahead.
Right, really quick, because I think I can answer this. Great question. Yeah, change it from reasonable grounds to objective grounds. Because if you look at what the ground says, it says there must be an objective basis. That's much clearer. As you were saying, if the officer said...
Oh, Mike. Mike's signal. Hello, Mike. Michael. Hello. Okay. I'm going to go back to you, Dennis, because you're basically the person that everyone's firing questions at.
That's all right.
Mark's thrown me a bit off there, but Mike, to summarise that, when I've been stopped, we're talking about that it's being trained and it's being looked at and how people are stopped. My question is, if I'm walking through Hemingwell, if I'm walking through King's Heath, or if I'm walking through any of those areas that are known to be high crime areas, right? That's a given, that's known. If I'm walking through any of those areas, dressed the way that I dress, I know that I'm going to get stopped because it's just what it is. My question is, surely knowing the intelligence that you have on criminals in those areas, what is it about stopping random civilians that fit the description keeps being done when you already know who the players are in those areas?
I think you're absolutely right on that. So if you look at the changes we've made to what we call the tasking process. So every 2 weeks we agree what are our priorities. So if you look at Wellingborough, I've been talking in the press this week about guns and gangs and a couple of shootings and 3 stabbings that we've had involving gangs fighting with each other over territory. Now, one of the officers came to me and they asked me to authorize a section 60, which means that the officers would have a blanket right to stop and search anybody without reason. I've declined that because actually we have the intelligence to know who is involved in this behavior. We know who the individuals are, so why do we need to do a blanket stop and search? Now, one of the things that we're doing now that's different is tomorrow night there is a dial-in where members of the stop and search working group and the community reference groups will be presented with what's going on in that area and their advice sort about how we can do this so that we don't disenfranchise the wider community and make sure we target the right people. So there's a dial in tomorrow night to discuss that with them, and it's about that and actually about another incident that's going on elsewhere in Northampton. So the University of Northampton has got some people targeting it for drugs. The people that are targeting it are black. So actually, how do we do that without upsetting the genuine students that are there from the black community? And we will take advice from that, from those groups. But actually, in our tasking process now, one of the questions I ask, and Kev Mulligan for the other side is what we're about to do going to drive up disproportionality, and what is it we want to see? So when the results come through and they say we stopped and searched 10 people and we're targeting knife crime, Well, the next question I'll ask is, what are the powers that we use for that? Is it smell of cannabis? Because actually, if we're tackling violent crime, I expect it to be weapons of offence we're searching for. I expect it to be the people that we've suspected and have intelligence on, not the smell of cannabis and we just stopped a load of people and didn't find anything and they're not linked to criminality and we've got no information about it. And that's some of the things that are happening now that's driven down the volume on stop and search, but the disproportionality element is still there. So that we're a long way from fixing this, but we're starting to put those checks and balances in now. And a lot of it has come from feedback from the Stop and Search working group and the community to try and address the way this is working and make it better than it is now, because the situation you describe is exactly the thing that the community say upsets them and disenfranchises them. And if you look at the professional standards side of things, you're absolutely right. If I went to the professional standards department and say, I've heard all of this stuff, so you must have loads of complaints about people being stopped and searched, there'll be none, because they don't trust the police to come forward. Paul Crofts and the Rights Equality Council will probably have a stack of complaints about it because they're happy to go and complain to them, but they won't come to the police. So it's all of those sorts of things that we need to try and change the narrative around and try and get the people engaging in so that we can start to get this right and improve it and move forward.
I'm going to go to Paul. Speaking of Asset Enric, I'm going to pass it over to Paul to wrap up, as we've gone over by, what are we on now? Gone over by 38 minutes, which is probably my fault because I wanted everyone to get a fair shake in answering stuff. And I know Paul's tired and I'm tired and everyone else is tired. So I apologise for it overrunning. I want to thank everybody that's come on, myself, before Paul wraps up. So thank you, everybody. Jenny, you are hilarious because I saw your spelling mistake and I could see that you was freaking out about your spelling mistake. So I saw you. That was quite funny. But yes, thank you, everybody. I'm going to pass over to Paul now to wrap up. Dennis, thank you very much. You've been a star answering those questions. I know it's been quite a few people firing at you. So thank you very much for answering as best as you could. And yeah, I'm going to pass over to Paul.
Thank you, Will. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
My sound seems to have gone off.
I can hear you.
I can't hear myself actually.
Keep your headphones on.
What I want to finish off by is first of all to thank you, Will.
Put your headphones back on.
For participating in this forum.
Very faint, Paul.
Mike and Ollie and Dennis.
Put your headphones back on.
Until now, everybody else has kind of dropped out. Gilly's dropped out, and other people have dropped out. We're slowly losing people. If we carried on talking long enough, we'd all start dropping out. And but hey, we've been over time. But thanks to everybody. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah.
I can't hear myself. Will's having a fit.
That's better. Yes, it's on.
What's the matter, Will?
I was screaming, put your headphones back on, and it just continuing.
I can hear myself. I can hear myself from the computer, can't I?
Oh, we can't hear you. We need the.
You can't hear me.
Yes, we need the mic. We need the mic to hear you.
Oh, bloody hell! But I can't hear through my earphones.
Take one off. Take one headphone off. Yeah, there we go. DJing now, aren't we? There we go. Rocking and rolling.
Too late. Anyway, let me repeat what I said. Thank you to you, Will, for sharing it to all the speakers, for surviving, and for those that have survived until now, and also the participants who've survived. The problem with stop and search, and indeed with tasers and anything to do with the police, is that the agenda becomes wider and wider and wider as the more you discuss. So it moves from stop and search and tasers to use of force, to police training, to police policies and procedures, and it just the issues just become wider and wider. From a community perspective, it also becomes wider and wider. So we start off with stop and search, the voices of the victims, in inverted commas, of stop and search, to then a wider grouping of the community of young people and the voices that they need. So the agenda just gets wider and wider and wider. And it becomes more and more difficult for us to kind of carry all those things in our heads and to act on them. I mean, one of the and this is one of the difficulties, I think, for the police, to be fair, is that there are so many agendas also that the police have to address. But after all, Dennis, you've got the resources to address them. Communities haven't. Communities don't have the resources to tackle the agendas that might exist for community groups, but the police certainly have resources. So I just want to thank again Mike in particular, I think, because he's been with us. I don't know if he's still with us now, but we haven't had his voice tonight, unfortunately, and that's a real disappointment. And he's been struggling in and out of this session throughout the evening, and it's a real disappointment. And I'm sorry, Mike, that we've not had really the full benefit of your participation in the session. I think we're going to have to organise something again, frankly, but what that is and when it is, we'll have to discuss. I also think that NREC's 9-point plan, which some of you know about, may help to carry this agenda forward. It provides a focus for carrying forward these issues, and I very much welcome the police's response to that 9-point plan, in that there's going to be a formal response by the police to what the REC are discussing. One of the areas which we haven't discussed, which is part of that 9-point plan, is the whole issue of drugs. And we've touched on it tonight, but I want to finish on this note, because at the heart of stop and search disproportionality, and indeed the whole disproportionality of black people involved in the criminal justice system, and tasers and a whole load of other things, is drugs, and how the whole question of drugs policy is driving racism in the criminal justice system from top to bottom, because the drugs policy is fundamentally racist. And I'm being pretty harsh here, not only in Britain, but across the globe. It's black people and minority groups across the globe that are being criminalized by the war on drugs. And we've got to get our heads around that, because unless we can look for alternatives to the war on drugs, we will not solve these issues. Doesn't matter how much training you do, how many black police officers we have, disproportionality and injustice and racism is being driven by our policy around drugs. And I think we need, as a society, there's no reason why we shouldn't start in Northamptonshire, need to have a real debate and discussion about alternative strategies around drugs. I'm going to finish on that note and thank everybody for being here, and hopefully we continue the discussion and the dialogue and the joint work which we're all doing. But thanks to the speakers in particular. Okay, over to you, Will.
Guys, thank you very much for everyone for coming. Thank you everyone for coming. If anybody has any other questions or anything they want to ask of NREC, drop us any message on Facebook or by email, get in contact with us. There'll be another event, as Paul's alluded to. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for everyone again. Enjoy the rest of the evening. I want to go and have some food now, because I've drank 2 litres of water. Unlike most people.
I don't think that was water, Will, was it? Or...
It was vodka. Yeah, it was just vodka to get me through everything. I've drank 2 litres of water, which is more than people in East London can do at the moment. But I think we're done here. So thank you everyone for coming, and see everybody again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers, Mike. Bye.